There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is your mountain.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Your Mountain podcast. We are glad you're joining us from wherever you are self-quarantining or socially distancing. And actually, I want to start this by asking Mike first. What are you doing during your social distancing time right now?
Working.
No, I mean, really.
Oh.
No, really,
right now,
Mike. Really?
Really what I'm doing is I'm trying to rest and in between potty train a puppy. And I'm not doing good at either.
Yeah, you got a puppy last week,
Yeah.
Or maybe not even a week ago, a beagle.
That's right. Yep. Picked up a beagle for the family. It's a cute little thing.
So I saw your on Facebook. I saw on your wife's Facebook page. I think it was on yours, but you have this whiteboard of things to do.
Yeah.
Like a schedule for the day for your kids and everything. And you went ahead and have this house is accident free for 0 days.
Yes.
With the puppy. Yeah. How's that streak holding up?
The streak continues, because we haven't had a day without. And I thought, and we're getting better. We're getting a lot better. All the major important things are being done outside. Every once in a while we slip up, but for the most part, things are doing really well. And
I got to say, before we move to Nephi, you had I would describe it as this will date us generationally, but it was kind of looked like a Unabomber style beard going on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was mostly gray.
It was pretty good.
Yeah. I at the beginning of the whatever you want to call it, social distancing, I stopped shaving and I thought I'm going to grow this out and I'm going to see how long it gets until this is over.
What happened?
Well, what I didn't count on was I didn't have like a beard trimmer to kind of keep it up. And it just got, I didn't like it.
Yeah. Well, you look better without it.
Well, time to start over. There's still time.
No, I'm trying to give you a compliment. You do. You look better without it.
Yeah.
You look 15 years younger. So, that's a backhanded compliment. You should take that.
That was weird.
I don't have a choice.
I know. Nephi, how's it going for you?
It's great. There's nothing like a pandemic to bring people together.
Or separate them completely? Or do you mean bring
absolutely. Yeah. So it's crazy times.
No, you're not wrong though. I mean, there are a lot more connected or people working to try to maintain connection, right? Yeah. A lot more phone calls rather than text messages.
I prefer that.
Yeah.
Truth be known, just so everybody knows, I hate text messaging. I absolutely hate it. I think it is the bane of the English language. I think it's terrible because like in a text, like it's whatever you want it to mean, and you can interpret it a bunch of different ways. You just lose so much flavor that you get from conversation. And I like conversations. In case you didn't notice, I like to talk.
Yeah, is that why you never, ever, ever respond to my text messages?
Mm-hmm. It's out of protest.
Yeah,
because if you're
that's what it is.
You could just call, and then we can have a little conversation. We talk.
Yeah, but you don't answer my calls either.
We talk about your hat. We talk about that's just not true. You just don't call.
I do. I call.
No,
I call.
No, really? I've been waiting for that call to go goose hunting.
Yeah, you're going to continue to wait for that because goose season doesn't start until November around these parts.
Just like last year, I'm getting my requests in early so they can not be listened to.
Perfect. You're going to bring that up every time now. I appreciate that. Well, so on my end, kind of the same sort of story, just spending ton of time with the family. And I think in hindsight, I'm going to look back on this 10 years from now, and I'm just going to absolutely, it's very, this is premature nostalgia, but I think it's going to be, I'm going to look back on it as one of the best times from a family standpoint, like being able to spend this much time with my kids and my family and really 24 hours a day, 7 days a week when normally they're in school. So trying to take advantage of that. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about today. We are here. So I'm excited about this because we're doing this. I don't know if we've ever done this where we have a guest on and we're all in 3 different locations too. So we're trying this out. We're all scattered all over the place. Our guest today, so I'm not going to tell you too much about her background.
But she probably tell us her name.
I'm going to. Yeah, I was trying to do a build up.
But your build up takes like 5 minutes.
I know, but it was going to be so good.
Podcast will be over.
Now you've ruined it. So I'm just going to say, Marcia Brownelee, welcome to the podcast. First of all, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. And I would have liked to have heard the build up.
Right? But you can blame Nephi now for just absolutely ruining it.
Everybody else does.
But I mean, what I was going to do was talk about how, you are running, and we're going to get to this later, but you're running this incredible program that I was going to say a new program, but it's actually been around for a couple of years now, the Artemis Sportswomen program. And you're the host of the podcast by the same name, and just an all around, I mean, you get after it in the backcountry. I am jealous every time I hear about some of the hunts that you get to do. Just, well-rounded sportswoman, champion for conservation. Just really excited to have you here today to provide some new perspectives for us. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That was a very nice build up.
It was going to be a lot.
He still got it.
It was even going to be better, but I felt like I had to tone it down because Nephi, but whatever. Anyway, we really appreciate you being here. And let me kick this conversation off by, so I know you're based in Montana now, but where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Michigan. I grew up in a small town named Clinton, Michigan. That's about a half an hour outside of Ann Arbor, so very southern Michigan. And I was there until I was 23 years old. And then I spent 7 years in Boston, Massachusetts, 2 years in Nederland, Colorado, and then moved to Missoula, Montana 10 years ago. So. And
so growing up in Michigan, I know a lot of people that grow up in Michigan's known for exceptional whitetail hunting and some remarkable fishing. And, that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. It's known as a really outdoor recreation hunting and fishing paradise. And I'm curious, spending that much time there, growing up there, were you a hunter or angler as a kid growing up?
I wasn't. So my family, my father has always been a hunter. He grew up on a farm in Michigan and so has hunted since he was a kid. But when I was born, it was more of that 1 week deer camp every year where he would go off with my grandpa and my great uncle. And in Michigan, to get to, even at that point, to get to good deer hunting land, you're driving like 6-8 hours just to get to the wide open spaces. So he would go off and do that. And my sisters and I have 2 older sisters would hang back and have a slumber party with my mom where we'd, drink ice cream floats and watch 16 Candles. So that was my experience of hunting when I was a kid. Fishing a little bit when we were on vacation because we did spend a lot of time in the woods, a lot of time camping, and a lot of time in the beautiful state parks that Michigan has to offer, but didn't do a lot of hunting or fishing while we were out there. I did catch my first rainbow trout when I was 8 years old in a little farm pond with a marshmallow. That was my first experience fishing, but I didn't start fly fishing or really getting after it until I moved to Montana.
So I want to, if you're comfortable talking about it a little bit, because I think this is going to tie into some of the work that you do now. Do you have a sense for, did you just not have interest in going as a kid? Do you ever pester your dad to go along, or is it something you weren't interested in as far as from a hunting standpoint?
Yeah, I didn't pester him. And I think had I I don't even think, had I pestered him, he would have taken me. It was I showed interest. I remember that because I remember being very curious when he would bring a deer back from deer camp, hanging it up in the backyard and processing it. I was very curious about that. But I didn't know any women who hunted. I didn't see any women who hunted or fished regularly in my life. So it didn't even cross my mind to ask.
So you didn't even think of growing up as hunting was something that women could do?
No, I didn't. And it's not that I didn't think it was something that they couldn't do. It honestly just never really crossed my mind.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So what made you then decide to get into hunting? And when?
Mm-hmm. So I've been hunting for about 5 years now. I started 2015. So I moved out to Montana about 10 years ago, and my dad moved out to Montana in 2012. So he lives in Hamilton. He's the range master at a rifle range down there. He loves shooting. He loves reloading.
Be careful.
I know. Sorry, Nephi.
Nephi's going to take this thing over, and we're going to go on this tangent, and the podcast is over.
Let's just say,
but he just now, Nephi his respect for you just went up 1,000-fold.
All right.
Your dad's awesome.
My dad is awesome.
I don't know him, but I know he's awesome.
If you want to talk to him, he can talk for hours, particularly these days when he's quarantined alone. He can talk for hours about ballistics.
Give him my number.
Okay.
Because Nephi needs a pen pal.
And he will call you. He won't text. So you're good there.
The day just gets better and better.
Anyway, sorry for interrupting, but I just saw Nephi light up over there.
His eyes sparkled.
Yeah.
So it was. I think my story in getting started hunting, I think is a unique one because when my parents moved out here in 2012, my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and so she was on a pretty steep decline at that point. And so my dad and I were working together to take care of her and try and support each other. And like most relationships, I think we're better when we're doing things together that we enjoy as opposed to just struggling together. And so I asked him to teach me how to shoot as just a way for us to do something together and spend some time in a positive way. And of course, he got very excited about that. So we went out to the range and I shot his I can't remember if it was his 308. I can't remember what it was, but it was the first time I shot a rifle. And so the kick was pretty pronounced for me. So he immediately took me to the store and bought me a 7-08, fixed it all up for me with this great scope and a nice muzzle brake on the end of it. So I could shoot it all day long and just be fine. And so at that point, I always joke that if you give a naturalist a rifle, she's going to want to take it hunting. And I did. And it was just like the perfect storm of events. One is that I was learning how to shoot. Two was that I already enjoyed spending time in the woods, and it was just another way to do that. Three, I was dating somebody who was an avid hunter, and so the opportunity to have a mentor readily available was there. And then four, I had reached a point where in my relationship to food where I felt if I can't procure it myself, then I really need to think about the choices that I'm making. It was important to me to at least know what that process was like to kill an animal that I ate then.
That's awesome. I think that's so cool that you went through that growth and that you had the opportunity to do that. And I just, because the door is open, I will say how important it is that you make sure that first experience that people have is one that, your dad did a great job of making sure that he tried to find you a good experience and steer you in the right direction in terms of, working with firearms. Cause too often people just, they make that experience terrible. Somebody behind this, giant howitzer and let it punish a female shooter so she never wants to come back. Perfect recipe for sharing the sport.
Yep. And he definitely had his own motives in doing that, but they worked out.
Wisdom.
Yep.
So who was what? Well, let me ask it this way. So you started hunting about 5 years ago. You said this is the 5th year of hunting for you. When you first got into it, who were your biggest influences? As far as I know, you said you were dating somebody at the time that was really avid into hunting. You didn't talk about your dad in that context? You talked about him from a shooting standpoint. I'm curious if he was involved in the growth as a hunter, and what did you do? Like, what did you do to get the skills and the knowledge to feel comfortable starting hunting as an adult?
So I think I'm still figuring that out to a certain extent. I'll definitely talk about my process, and it started with, it's crossing that line, right? And I think there's two lines. One is being comfortable with your weapon of choice, whether it's a rifle or a bow, just figuring out how to use that. But then the other one is gaining knowledge in the field about the process of hunting. And so those were twofold. And my father definitely played the biggest role in helping me, be comfortable with my tools. And then my boyfriend at the time helped me to experience being in the field. And so before I even carried a gun in the woods, I went on a duck hunt. I went on a goose hunt, merely as like an observer. So I can, feel what it's like to be in this environment with this as our goal. And then, processing it afterwards and kind of being able to participate in those rewards of it. And then went on a deer hunt and brought my own rifle with me at that point and was lucky enough to harvest it that day. I harvested a deer on my first hunt out in the woods. Don't hate me.
Just mad respect right now, that's all.
So, and being supported very well every step of the way, from scouting the area to taking the shot to processing it. I feel very lucky to have had that experience with the mentor that I did have. So then I was hooked, it didn't take long for me to get hooked and to have the self-motivation to want to get back out there. And then from there, it kind of took a left turn, cause that boyfriend and I, the relationship ended, we went our separate ways. And so then I did turn a little bit more to my father. And he was great in providing me opportunity to get in the woods. Hunting is something that he loves to do, particularly now that he's out here in the West, he does it more often. And he wanted to share that with me. And so, he would plan trips for us to take. And I was the lucky recipient again of his generosity. But then on the flip side, at that point, I found myself in this position where I needed to teach myself a lot, which I think everybody does at some point, because it doesn't do you any good to rely on that mentor in the field for your entire hunting experience. At some point, you need to step out, and I like to compare it to driving. Like, you can't always be the passenger. At some time, you need to sit behind the wheel and figure out where you're going on your own. And so I did that. And again, just kind of jumped in with both feet and invited a female friend of mine who had also been hunting for 1 year at that point, and said, "Hey, do you want to go to Eastern Montana and figure out how to hunt antelope?" And she was crazy enough to say yes. So we got in the car with our maps and drove 8 hours and figured out how to hunt antelope. And we weren't successful our first 2 years, but the third year we harvested an antelope, and that was really exciting. So a lot of it was, always having those mentors. And at that point, my community, again, being in Montana, and the more you start talking about hunting, the more people you connect with who are super knowledgeable about hunting. And so really finding those people that I could reach out to for, electronic mentors, even if they aren't in the field. So if I had a question about, what's the difference between state land and BLM? Because that's where I was, right? It's like, what are the differences? What's BMA? What's BLM? There's just a lot of acronyms. So even just having the opportunity to text somebody to help with clarifying that, and then figuring the rest out in the field. And yeah, you definitely learn how to define success differently. Like I said, those first 2 years, antelope hunting, it was a new animal, it was a new habitat, it was a new gun. So, but just diving in and going for it.
I think I'm looking at Mike right now, because I tend to think that he can relate to some of what you're describing. As I know Mike, you've talked before on this about how, you did some hunting as a kid, like squirrel hunting and some small game, but you never did any big game hunting until you moved west, and as an adult. And so I think your situations parallel each other a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I could relate to a lot of what she's describing, because to the extent I did hunt growing up, it was usually with a shotgun or a 22, squirrels, quail, and it was on small land, private land, back 40 type situations. And it was well defined, and you were staying in a cabin or a place, and you were walk and then walk back. It was a pretty simple setup, and you didn't have to know too much. And so your woodcraft was different in Florida there for those types of things than coming out west, and suddenly you've got miles and miles of different property and regulations and issues to deal with, and you're carrying a different type of rifle, and you are having to do a variety of different things that you just have to learn. And until you do it and you see it done, especially see it done, it's real difficult to kind of imagine what you're supposed to be doing to do it right.
You know what I really like about your story, though, and I think this is huge and impactful and important for sportsmen everywhere to kind of to internalize and take forward and remember. Dave said, like, yeah, you get to learn, but in reality, we're all learning. We're all learning all the time. And I think somebody like Mike, like you, like I've got a good buddy who's a former Navy SEAL commander who just started hunting and is just absolutely eating it up. So obviously he has all the fieldcraft skills in the world, but he's learning these other pieces. And one of the things that's unique and fun about hunting with you guys and hunting with him is that there's no preconceived notion of like, oh yeah, I know it all. I've got it all down. They're just they're so ready to learn. And I try and be that way too. Cause honestly, hey, as much as Dave would like to point out that I'm not the world's greatest hunter, I actually realize that. And I know that there's just so much more for me to learn every year, every day, every weekend, every hunt. And I think it's just refreshing and to me, super fun to hunt with people who are humble about it. And we're like, oh yeah, I'm learning about it because you know what? So am I. And it makes it just much more fun. I love that community, and I love that you're so animated about it. And that you were willing to take that, to step in there. Because I think sometimes the hunting community is our own worst enemy because it does seem like it's some kind of experts only world, and it's really not. It's for everybody. That's my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think when you learn as an adult too, I think I brought my own preconceived notions about what I was supposed to know, how this was supposed to go, how I was supposed to learn, how quickly I would learn. I brought all of that with me into the field. And it quickly teaches you that none of that is worthwhile. So the quicker you can get rid of that, the better the experience will be.
Yeah. I mean, Dave still doesn't know how to use binoculars.
I point him the wrong way. I got to see him the animals closer. So I hold him backwards. I make mistakes every single year. If anybody tells you they've mastered hunting, they're absolutely wrong, because the animals surprise you every year by what they do. The things that you expect them to do that they don't do, the weather conditions that are thrown at you in combination with what the animals are doing. You put all that stuff together, and then you put a bunch of other hunters out in the field kicking around, and it's an unpredictable adventure. And anybody that says they've figured it out is wrong.
It's part of what makes it special too, is because like once you kind of get that, then you realize that it is this huge continuum, and we all are in this together. And that's what makes it kind of a fun, lifelong pursuit, is because you're never going to master it. You're always going to be getting better and wishing you were better at some aspect of it. And to me, that makes it very rewarding. So,
yeah. I agree. The challenge is what keeps you going out there. If it were easy, it wouldn't be fun.
So that's a nice little segue into the next question I want to ask about. And what I'm doing here is laying the foundation of your hunting credibility, right? Just laying the foundation of your hunting credibility before we move into what it is that you do for a living too, and how the two tie together so nicely. But I really want to know, as you've described that. If it were easy, it wouldn't be fun doing. What's your most memorable hunt that you've been on so far?
That is always such a tricky question for me. Because I have, they're all special in their own way. And I think for purposes of this podcast, I will focus on that antelope. Because of, and it was never like, for me, this particular hunt wasn't about that moment, or that day in the field. It was everything that happened before it to lead up to that day in the field. So like I said, I learned how to do that myself. I started going out with a friend, and we literally like crawled our way across the sage trying to figure out, what are the habits of this animal? How do we get close to them? How do we even find them? And all of that culminated in this gorgeous morning. Again, we were in eastern Montana, just south of Miles City, where we were crawling across the sage in this coulee, and popped up over the edge, and the sun was behind the antelope. And so we sat there for about 45 minutes, just watching them slowly graze their way towards us. And so being able to sit there and have the opportunity to watch them for so long is just something that I really enjoy. And then feeling myself go through that process of, okay, I'm watching them. Okay, now I have a shot. Okay, I'm going to take the shot. And just kind of the observing the chemical response that my body had to each one of those decisions, and how the adrenaline rushes when all I did was make a choice. Found that very interesting. And then taking the shot, and dropping the animal really close. It was a good shot, and I was proud of that. And then seeing this animal up close for the first time ever. And it was just gorgeous. I mean, their eyes are huge, and their fur is unlike anything I've ever touched. And then field dressing it with my friends. And so I was in the field. There were 3 of us, and I was with 2 other women, and the hunt started with us trying not to laugh, and ending up crying in the middle of this coulee because we're trying to be quiet, but we're just cracking up over our interpretation of different hand signals that we were using in the field. And then processing that animal on my kitchen counter for myself, all the way to making some really delicious food with it. And so it was the most memorable hunt because it was, 3.5 years in the making. And I was just really proud of the knowledge that I gained on my own in that process.
So I think that, first of all, that's awesome. Second of all, congratulations. Thanks. When you don't have that immediate success, and that can be something that frustrates people and drives them away. And the fact that you stuck with it for several years before you had that success, it clearly makes the reward that much greater. And I'm glad that it hooked you. And I'm also glad that it hooked you because I wonder if without those experiences, would you be doing what you're doing today?
No. Flat out.
So let's transition to that. I mean, tell me from a career trajectory, a career arc, tell me how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. So that is, again, I don't think it's a trajectory that anybody saw coming. My background is in education. I have a master's in education and worked for 15 years as an educator in early childhood. My focus was on preschool. And for the 6 years before becoming the program manager for Artemis, I was the executive director of a nonprofit nature-based preschool. And so my focus there was connecting children to being outside. And one of my favorite quotes as an educator is from David Sobel. And the quote is, "You have to teach somebody to love something before you can ask them to protect it." And so that was really my mission in that role, was connecting these kids to their natural environment, allowing them to follow their curiosity, giving them the tools they needed to be outside. And then in doing the same for the teachers, because impassioning the teachers with their relationship with the natural world just empowered them to be able to do that for their students, and creating a community in Missoula where I was teaching, with that as our primary value when we're looking to raise these kids to be healthy, happy adults. So that's where I was for the last 15 years. And then I hunted, and it drastically changed my connection to the natural world. It drastically changed my approach to the natural world in ways that I did not expect at all. And I wanted to bring that experience to other people. And so I started a business here in Missoula with a friend of mine called Venery, which I'm no longer an owner of, but it still exists and still does really good work. But its mission was to educate women on hunting, to be that stepping stone for women who needed to bridge that gap from I think I want to hunt to I do hunt. And so we held events under that. And I was still the executive director at the school at the same time I was doing this business. And then I went on a bear hunt. That was fabulous. And I was like, how can I do this for my work? And that's when,
everybody asks that question, right? Everybody asks that question. So they're all going to be super jealous when they hear that you can actually do that. So,
yep.
Yeah. Yep. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I lucked out because I asked that question, and then a friend sent me this job post, and so I applied, and so what I didn't have prior to this point a background in conservation advocacy or conservation policy. What I did have was a passion for community building and for relationship building and for education and for working with women, because when you work in early child care, you work with a lot of women. And so that's what I brought to Artemis when I took over this job.
Okay. So that brings us almost to the present. So you've taken over as running the Artemis Sportswomen program, but we still haven't described what that is yet.
Right. So
how about we do that? What is the Artemis program? What's its history? Give us the genesis story of this and what it is, and we'll go from there. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions about this.
Yeah. So Artemis Sportswomen is an initiative of the National Wildlife Federation to engage women, hunters and anglers in conservation advocacy. That's kind of the nutshell of what we do. We're almost 3 years old. We were founded in June of 2017, and we focused on operating in the West as part of the National Wildlife Federation, working on public lands. So the origin story is a bunch of women who we refer to as co-founders were recruited from across the West to come together and figure out what the values and the mission of Artemis will be. There was an identified need and an identified lack, right? The need was that women were the fastest growing demographic in hunting and fishing, and they needed a voice and a community to turn to for support. And the lack was the voice of women hunters and anglers in conservation advocacy. And how can we be a source for them in that realm as well? How can we elevate that voice in the national conversation to tell a broader story about why these issues are so important to us? So that was the reasoning behind why Artemis was necessary. And we had 8 women come together from across the West. And for the first year of its existence, it operated on, part-time staff and volunteers. And it launched in, as I mentioned, we are in the West. So our target states were Idaho, Montana, Colorado, Wyoming, and New Mexico. And they focused a lot on sage-grouse work, identified 2 iconic species in the mule deer and the cutthroat as the species we were going to throw our weight behind as conservation advocates in those issues that we were going to focus on. And then I came on in June of 2018. And from there, we expanded our reach to include Oregon and Washington. And then this past February, we went national, which is really exciting. And I think one thing that we noticed right from the start was that there were women across the country who were looking for this network and this resource. And we were not serving them by focusing our work in the West. We chose to do that, and I stand behind that choice very strongly because I think we need to grow smartly, and we need to grow strategically, and we need to grow in the way that we can bring our values with us and support women in the same way. And so this year we launched nationally and opened up ambassador applications across the country. And then, now we can't have events. So there's a little dent in that whole system. But we have about 50 women from our co-founders who now serve as an advisory council to community organizers who we call our state ambassadors across the country who are really actively engaged in Artemis. And we started with 8. So to see that growth in the level of engagement that we're able to offer to women has been really exciting.
What kind of work do these ambassadors do for you? I mean, you said you have, I think you said 50 now across the country as organizers. But what does that really mean? What kind of work do they do for you?
So the role is really twofold. One, it is first to build a community of women hunters and anglers in their town or county, in their physical space. And part of that is because, I think when you're talking about the R3 movement, the recruitment, retention, and reactivation of hunters and anglers, when it comes to women, recruitment seems to be pretty effective, right? Because we have the fastest growing numbers in the demographics of increased hunters and anglers. So recruitment seems to be good, but where we're failing is in retention. And for me, that is because there's a lack of community, there's a lack of relationships, and there's a lack of an extended network that are able to support the women hunter and angler in their path to get more experience. And so what those ambassadors are doing is really creating that community of women hunters and anglers to aid in that retention, to build those relationships that you can call someone and say, hey, do you want to go hunting this weekend? Or you can call someone and say, hey, can you watch my kids while I go hunting this weekend? You can call someone and say, hey, I'm a bow hunter. Can you teach me how to shoot a rifle? Just build those relationships with women. And we like to say, like, it's not, we're building a community. Our goal is to elevate and include, not to exclude. So we have Artemen. You're one of our favorites, Dave.
I don't know what I do to deserve that, but I'll take it.
Neither do we.
Well, you're wearing the hat right now, so that's a good start.
I'm going to wear this hat out, by the way. I'm going to need it for too long.
I got more. I got backup. I know where to find you. And so the emphasis is not on building an exclusive community of women, but it is a focus on building a community that is primarily women. Just so, when a woman who is interested in starting to learn how to hunt can have the one barrier removed of, am I going to walk into a room with a bunch of guys and feel really uncomfortable about my lack of knowledge? And some people do that. And some men feel uncomfortable in that situation. It doesn't really matter. But it's just about removing that barrier. So you're walking into an environment that's familiar. It's like code switching. They're walking into an environment where they speak the language, and making sure that support and that comfort level is there.
That's awesome. And you hit the nail on the head. And I think a lot of people don't understand that dirty secret that a lot of times with recruitment, retention, reactivation, these new hunters that come in, and you highlighted it beautifully, specifically women. They're a huge, fast growing demographic, but they're also the first group to drop out. And so as much as we tout, like, oh yeah, it's the fastest growing group, the problem, I mean, you hit it on the head. And I think personally that it has a lot to do within our community of this tendency to be like, oh yeah, this know-it-all tendency, this closed door tendency that we have, that, whether it's real or just perceived, it's there. And it's something we have to really try to overcome to continue to provide these opportunities for more people, because they're great opportunities. We just got to open the doors.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you. Oh, so sorry. Go ahead, Marcia.
I forgot what I was going to say.
I apologize. I didn't mean to cut you off. What I kind of wanted to build off of Nephi's statement, and I wanted to ask this question, and you don't have to answer this, but I'm curious what when I say we, I'm talking actually Nephi, Mike, myself, and other men, what men can do to be more welcoming.
How about to not be an impediment?
Yeah. I think that's a good way of putting it. I've heard we've talked to other people, other women hunters on this podcast in the past, and sometimes and you touched on it, very delicately, and I think, probably appropriately, but I'm going to see if I can push you a little farther with it. We've talked to some in the past that have said, pretty bluntly that it was, in some instances, it was the action of either men in their lives or men that they didn't know, that they would come across in the field when they tried to hunt, that would be the biggest impediment to either hunting or continuing to hunt. And so I'm kind of curious from your perspective, what we can do. You're talking about building this big community for women, but we have a responsibility as men too, I think. And I want to know from your perspective what we can do to be better.
Okay, so I thought of three things, and I'm going to try to hold on to all three of them as we go. So one is, I think one thing that frustrates me, and I one of my favorite places to hunt is in the Bitterroot here in Montana, and the Bitterroot here in Montana is full of a lot of men who really like to tell you how to hunt, and to a certain extent, that's fabulous, because when I first started, I knew nothing about hunting. But I think it's important to acknowledge the growth that happens in the experience of a hunter. And so a lot of times, I'm 5'2". I smile a lot. I walk into a room full of hunters and my abilities are downplayed. There's the assumption made that I know nothing, that I don't have any experience, and that they have something they can teach me. So I think first of all is checking, and not everybody does this, but it happens a lot. Checking that reaction, like, check in with this person to see what their experience is before making any assumptions about their lack of knowledge. That's one of the things that I still find very frustrating. I think I actually equally get really irritated. I took note of your no swearing comment at the beginning of the podcast. I get really irritated when they're surprised by my skill level. Because it feels condescending. And it really irritates me. I welcome the acknowledgement of my skill level and my experience and the stories that I have to tell. But the surprise is not necessary. Secondly, I think one of the problems, and this is actually what I was going to say, so it came back around. I remembered after you interrupted me, Dave.
Yeah. Nephi is usually the one that interrupts, so I'm sorry.
That's all right. I got it again. So much of our recruitment is based on mentoring. And again, that's an important role. I don't want to downplay the importance of having that mentor, because having that expert is a safety and a comfort in the field. So having that mentor is essential. And it can also be very transactional, right? It's like the mentor is in the field doing a service for this new hunter. So they're going to go teach this new, and I've done this myself when I was working with Venery. Like, that's not me hunting, that's me teaching. And so I'm going to teach this person in the field, and then I'm going to go off with my own friends and go for a hunt. And so that's great for recruitment and introduction into the field. But again, it's not great for retention, because what you want is somebody that you can go hunting on the weekends with, somebody you can build that relationship with, and somebody who enjoys being in the field with you. So it's not always possible to transition from mentor to hunting buddy, and nor should that be expected. But I do think if men are looking for ways that they can support women in the field, it's to remind them that, you can invite them into the woods with you even after they know what they're doing. And I said there was three things, and I was going to try and hold on to them, and I lost the third thing.
Well, if it comes to you, bring it back up.
Okay.
Because I think these messages that you're telling, these are important messages for us to always keep with us. And you remember, I see the eureka moment, the eureka moment.
The eureka moment. You could tell it's been a week. So the eureka moment, again, it just goes back to what I was saying about at some point you need to switch from being the passenger to being the driver. And so I think encouraging the women in your lives who do hunt to have confidence in their skills, to take that step and go out on their own, or to take that step and go out with somebody who isn't their mentor, and to value that experience, and all of the mistakes that come with it, and just help them feel confident in taking that step and supporting them to have the space to take that step.
So I have one more question, and I think it builds off of this pretty nicely before we get into talking some of the policy work that Artemis does, the advocacy and policy work that Artemis does, because you touched on that. But I want to come back to new hunters, whether they're teenagers wanting to get involved, or whether they're adults wanting to get involved, when these girls and women are interested in hunting but don't know how or where to get started. What would you tell them?
Mm-hmm. Email me. So I think, seriously though, I think if you're interested in getting started, you probably have a lot of questions. And if there isn't anybody in your life who you're comfortable asking those questions of, it can be intimidating to find somebody. I joked on one of our podcast episodes recently, like it's like being that fourth grader on the playground asking the new kid if they want to be your friend, or approaching the woman you see in line at the coffee shop in camel pants and saying, "Hey, do you hunt?" There's a level of stepping outside of your comfort zone to even start those conversations that needs to happen. And so seriously, email me. I can help you figure out who those people are in your area. Like I said, we have 50 women across the state, across the country. Maybe one of them is near you. Also, and Artemis isn't the only organization doing this. There are, if you look in, there are Facebook groups where you can just, troll for a little while before you find somebody who you're interested in striking up a conversation with. It's like the Tinder of the hunting world. And then your state agencies.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have to stop you there. You say
we own the patent on that already. It's called timber.
We call it timber.
Yeah, you can't be. That's our proprietary.
I take comfort knowing that it's already out there.
We haven't developed it yet, but it's
proprietary thoughts. Yes. It's a proprietary idea that we just haven't. We don't have the code.
It's our intellectual property.
I like it.
But yeah, it's
call
timber.
Me when you're ready for investors.
Perfect.
Timber. I think it would be really successful in a number of different ways. But also your state agencies, right? State agencies are really hungry to support new hunters and anglers. So call your state agency and they'll be able to direct you to resources in your area that can help you get started.
Okay.
Go
ahead, Nephi. Sorry.
Just a great conversation. I think trying to step back into some of those things that you said, we can do better. I think it's incumbent upon us, people as hunters. Again, it's just a level of humility that needs to be there. And you can't judge how good a person is at something without being out in the field with them. And even if you can, it's just not the right thing to do, and, I thought of my good friend Diana Moeller, who runs an effort called the DC Project, where she is an advocate for Second Amendment rights. But it's all political parties. It's all walks of life. Women who go to DC together as advocates. And Di's a professional shooter, and she was a cop in Oklahoma. And she walks into a room and she's tiny. She's like, and she gets, she goes to a gun shop and the same thing happens. Like, people take her for granted and they assume things about her. Well, I will tell you straight up, Di is way more a bad A than I am, at all aspects of life. And it's just, we got to avoid that. That stereotyping is not beneficial, that putting people into different, categories, it just doesn't help us as a community to hyphenated hunting, hyphenating people, hyphenating activities. And it doesn't help us grow.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
All right. I'm going to do a little transition here. And I want to go from talking about the hunting side of Artemis to the advocacy and policy side. And I guess what I want to know is, you mentioned, at least when you started, that two of the big issues you identified from an advocacy standpoint were mule deer and cutthroat trout in the West. And now you've gone national. And I'm curious, I guess I have a series of questions, but one would be, what are your highest priority advocacy issues today and why? And then let's talk a little bit about why it's important for hunters to be involved, to understand the nuances, or at least at a cursory level, the law and policy around wildlife and land management, and why it's important to get involved and be involved. I know that's a lot that I just threw at you.
No, that's okay. Which one would you like me to start with?
Whichever one you want to.
Okay. So I think I'll start with why I think it's important to be involved, and to understand at a cursory level the policies that manage our lands and wildlife. And I think, speaking from my own experience, as I mentioned, I wasn't a conservation advocate before I took this job. And in my experience as a naturalist and in my experience as an educator, and just the importance that the natural world has to me personally, it's changed a lot since I was a kid. And it's just a lot has changed, and it started to feel really important for me to be on the front lines and to work more directly for the policies that were guiding what's happening, right? So the policies that go into place today are going to determine what the environment that the conservation environment looks like 5, 10, 20, 50 years down the road. And so it was important to me not to switch my focus to be more directly involved, as opposed to creating the stewards of the future, which is what I was hoping to do as an educator. And I think protecting the places that and the wildlife that mean so much to you. Knowledge is power. And so the more you know, the more effectively you can participate in shaping the future and the policies that will get us there. And so I really think it's important that people understand, because I think if you don't understand, then you're either going to get mad at what's happening without really knowing why it's happening, or you're going to think that everything is okay and not see the implications down the road. So in order to protect what we get so much from personally, for our health, both mental, physical, emotional, just that connection to the land, we need to understand it. And I think it's complicated and it's messy, and understanding it at a deep level is not easy. But I think we can all understand it at a cursory level, so we can ask the important questions that need to be asked.
And the second part, I don't have a follow up on that. I think you nailed that on the head, and it's one of the big reasons why we do the podcast we do and the way we do it, because it's so important for the community to have an understanding of what's going on. Like we say at the very beginning, the decisions that are being made with your land, water, and wildlife, they're being made every day, and you should know about them.
Mm-hmm.
And you should, so that's the first part. You should know about them. Then how do you get involved? The second piece is how do you train people to be advocates, or provide the tools to be effective advocates, and then encourage them to get involved? How do you do that?
Yeah. So for me, I think it's really important, first of all, to to figure out what it means to each individual person to be an advocate. Because I think when I was approaching this, like I mentioned with becoming a hunter, I brought a lot of preconceived notions, and predefined notions about what that meant, what that looked like, and what that ended up being. And so I think before you do anything, just scratch that off the table, because to a certain point, with the way things are marketed, you're being sold something, and that if it doesn't fit you, then you might not feel like you can dip your toes in there. So get rid of all of those preconceived notions and really identify what it means to you to be an advocate. And I think it can take a number of different routes depending both on the time that you have, right? Because everybody's got lives, and I do this for a living, and so I do it for like, what, I don't know, 50, 60 hours a week. So I can dive in more deeply than somebody who has a family and has another job and is pulled in a million different directions. So there are different levels that you can engage in advocacy, depending on where you are and what you're able to do. But don't let anybody else define that for you. There are a number of different ways to participate, and each way is important. So figure out where you can fit in, and go from there. And then I think secondly, it is an incredibly complex spider web of issues, there's just so many sides to it, and it's really complicated, and it's really difficult to understand the whole thing. So find an organization that you trust, find an organization that represents your values, and you're not going to agree with them on 100% of the issues, but if you trust them to be honest with you, and to answer your questions, factually, then that's the organization that you want to dive into, because they will let you know what's happening, and they will condense it, into information that will speak to you in a level that's accessible, instead of using language that, it takes a biology degree to be able to sort through. Also, things like this podcast are super helpful, because it breaks it down, in a way that's digestible and a pleasant in a pleasant earbud.
Not our podcast, but other podcasts break it down so it's digestible.
No, I think that's what we try to do, Nephi. We don't. Yeah, we keep it pretty high. We get way down in the weeds. We get way down in the weeds. We do all the above.
Wonk. So,
yeah. Well, check out gerrymandering. That's one of our episodes. It's very good.
Hey, now
we like to give Mike a hard time about that one, because it's like, oh, this has a direct tie to conservation. We should really, and he's right. You can,
yep.
Yeah. Well, when you have to explain how to us, Mike, I mean, that's your first key, like first hint.
Fair enough. Okay,
but we still love you.
Yeah,
we're just going to point that out until we have an episode that flops worse than that one.
Okay. I like that.
We almost did, Mike and I, but hey.
Yeah, right. But it didn't.
We came close.
I think there was at least one comment that was not as harsh, but on par.
Well, yeah. Anyway, let me ask you, pivoting back away from us, back to you, Marcia. Two things. One, do you provide through Artemis some of the tools that you're talking about, the information that you were just describing for, how to make those decisions, how to be an effective advocate, how to get involved in advocacy?
We do. So up until this point, a lot of that information has been delivered through events. That's the other role that I didn't mention with our ambassadors, is not only are they building these communities in the area, but they're our conduit for conservation. So what Artemis does for our ambassadors is we prepare information for them to pass on to their community, whether it's background about an issue or a specific action alert that we want people to be aware of. Our ambassadors are the messengers to their community to engage people in that conversation. So we offer advocacy trainings in person. Up until this point is how we've done it. We're working on transitioning it so there are more online resources. for a number of reasons. One, because and we were doing this even before coronavirus. So this is putting a little gas, it's pushing the gas pedal down a little bit, but it's already in the works. Because I think when you're talking about getting people to come to events, it's much easier to say, hey, do you want to go on a turkey hunt and get people to show up than it is to say, hey, do you want to talk at conservation policy? Oddly enough.
That's weird.
It's weird. It's hard to pull people away on a Thursday night. So we're, and it's also difficult to align to people's schedules because, again, everybody's busy and has a lot going on. So we're moving it to a webinar. And so it will be a number of different levels, all the way from, what does it mean to be an advocate? What type of advocate are you? All the way to in-depth perspectives on conservation issues and how to be effective, how to communicate effectively with decision makers, and how to run for office, how to serve on a board. Because I think another issue we have is I think I heard a statistic, you might want to fact check this, but it's like a woman needs to be asked at least 9 times to run for office before she considers herself qualified for that. And obviously that varies depending on an individual, but by and large, again, it's not that I didn't think I could or could not be a hunter. It never just crossed my mind. It's not that women think they could or could not be a leader. It doesn't always cross their mind to put their hat in that ring. And so encouraging women and offering role models and knowledge on how to take that first step to serve on a commission, to run for your city council, to walk into your legislator's office and tell them what you think, offering different support network for that. So again, it's this, I view it very similarly to how we're supporting women in the field and mentoring them to increase their sporting capacity. It's the same thing. This is how we're mentoring you in your conservation advocacy capacity. And the community and the relationships that we're forming are there to offer the same kind of support. This isn't a one-off relationship where we say, here's how you write an excellent op-ed to get the job done. This is, do you want a conference call with your legislator and I'll stay on the background to offer support? It's building those relationships in that community to celebrate our successes and to, debrief when things go wrong.
I got to tell you, this sounds like something that what you've described sounds like something that would be really beneficial to anybody, not just women. This is a tool that all hunters and anglers need.
Yep.
It's a tool in the toolbox that we all need. And we've talked about this on this podcast a lot because we are an ultra minority in this country, right? Mm-hmm. As far as our demographics from the number of us that hunt being less than 5% of the overall population. To be effective, we've got to be on message and we've got to be factual. We have to engage the right way, and effectively, right? And so gender doesn't matter here.
Yep. And along those lines, as I was mentioning before, this is an inclusive community. So men are welcome at our events as long as they understand that they will be led by women.
I've been led by women my whole life.
Perfect.
and then I had daughters.
And then you had daughters. Yep. You and my dad could probably talk about that too. If you want him to give you a call, he raised 3 daughters. He always jokes he had 3 daughters and all the boys you could ever want.
Yeah, I would agree. That's a perfect line. Let me talk for a minute about your podcast, if you don't mind, because I'm assuming you weave some of this advocacy work into that. First of all, just tell us about it. What's it about? When did you get started? What are you hoping to accomplish with it? Tell us about your podcast.
Yeah. So, one of the things, in addition to creating community to help with the retention of women hunters, I think it's also important that we elevate and amplify the voice of women hunters on the national level. So they're more present in the national conversation that's happening around hunting and fishing. And this goes back to, again, my own, framing it in my own personal experience. When I was a kid, I didn't see women hunters or anglers. I didn't hear them. And so it never occurred to me to ask if this was something I could do. So I think the more we incorporate that voice on the national level, the more we communicate the relevance of hunting and fishing to our modern life, the importance of it, and provide the opportunity for more women to say, hey, that might be something I can do. So that's one of the goals with the podcast, is to, there are a ton, as you guys are aware, of hunting and fishing podcasts. This is definitely one of the ways that our sporting community connects and talks to each other and learns from each other. And in the research that I was doing specifically for hunting, there are a few more fishing podcasts, but for hunting, there's like 4 or 5 podcasts across the country that I could find that had women hosts and were about hunting. So there's and most of them were, individuals self-starting on this journey because they wanted to put their voice out there. So it's a small playing field when it comes to women-led hunting podcasts. And I thought Artemis was in a really good position to bring together female voices and get it out there in the world. So we started in January. We launched officially on January 31st. And this week was our 13th podcast episode, which was very, very exciting. And the goal is, we run the gamut from telling personal stories of women in the field. So there's more voices out there that people can connect with. We talk about sporting capacity, and we've kind of focused on that a lot lately. With everybody at home, we're talking a lot about, we had an episode called Don't Run, which was all about how to appropriately respond to animal encounters with animals like moose and mountain lions and bear. This week's episode was about turkey hunting, and we went really deep into kind of the biology of a turkey and their behavior. And so we do a lot of sporting capacity building, storytelling, and then, yes, conservation. In the past, we had a great episode with NWF Public Lands team member Mary Green talking about NEPA and the importance of commenting on the proposed changes to the NEPA policy.
Can I stop you right there for just 1 second? You threw out 2 acronyms right in that sentence.
Thank you. Yes.
And so just NWF and NEPA.
Yes. NWF is the National Wildlife Federation. And again, Artemis is an initiative of the National Wildlife Federation, and we operate under on the Public Lands team. And then NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. And so we had a full episode that got a little wonky because you can't not get wonky with NEPA, right?
We even haven't done a NEPA episode yet.
Yeah.
We've had a number of people,
because we don't understand it.
We've actually had a number of people write in and ask us to do a NEPA episode, and
we just cried.
We're like, we're not. Yeah, we're not even that.
I was sucking my thumb.
I don't know. I think we've done 90 episodes, and almost every single one of them dances around it. So maybe all together, you might get something from it.
But we definitely haven't.
Yeah, go listen to all those episodes for everybody that's listening right now.
Just
actually, one of them, and then
actually, what we should do right now is say we don't need to do it. You can just go to the Artemis podcast and listen to their NEPA episode for all your wonky NEPA needs.
You should binge listen to all ours first, just so we're clear. Then go listen to the Artemis podcast.
No,
really.
I'm assuming everybody's already listened to all of our episodes, and they're just wondering, when are we going to do that NEPA episode? And I'm saying maybe we don't need to, because Mary is a very smart attorney, and you all did a very nice job with that episode, and it's super wonky. I mean, it meets the wonky criteria that we strive for on every episode. So I'm just suggesting that might be a good one for people to check out.
In this episode, I think it ended up clocking in at like 36 minutes.
Oh, we couldn't do that in 36 minutes. It took us 4 hours to do a NEPA episode.
We were super top level. Didn't go too deep.
Anyway, so back to the podcast really quick.
Yeah.
So you're 13 episodes in. You go from advocacy to storytelling and everything in between. And you've really carved out a niche here for yourself as one of the very few women women-centric, really hunting podcasts out there, right? And so, that's a great resource for not just women, for everybody to tune into and listen to, but certainly for women that are interested in hunting or are already hunters, to check out that podcast. Here's the point where I say, start the selfless plugs on where do you find all this? Where do you find your podcast? Where do you find information on the Artemis program? If people want to get a hold of you, how do they do it? Give us all your information.
Yes. So the Artemis podcast you can find wherever you get your podcasts. If you just Google or search for Artemis, it should come up. It's one of the first ones. You'll see our logo. It's that nice, beautiful orange A with a little hook on the end. They can't see your hat, but if you could, you'd see the logo. We're presented by Hunt to Eat, which is really exciting to be working with them on the podcast. It's also available on our website, which is artemis.nwf.org. And there's right on the landing page, it will take you to our podcast, and you can stream them directly from our website. And then I did offer people to email me, and I was serious about that. And you could do that at artemis@nwf.org. And again, that's ARTEMIS@nwf.org. And we are super active on social media. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook.
What's the handle there?
Artemis_Sportswomen.
Perfect. So I would encourage everybody to go check them out. I know that you've been really supportive of us, and our podcast, and we really appreciate that. And, we really encourage people to check out the work that you're doing and to check out your podcast. There's a lot of great information there, a lot of great tools, and just great people. And you're just one of the really good people out there in this space. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you or talk with you about all of this.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great being on. And I have to say, I think as a new conservationist, I was hungry for a podcast that would help me dig more deeply into the issue in a really well-rounded way. And you guys have filled that need. So thank you for doing what you do. And it's been great being on.
Oh, we appreciate it. And we can't let you leave, though, without asking you one more question. I know that you've listened to at least a handful of our episodes, maybe 91-ish or so. Is what I'm hoping.
If you haven't, you should go binge listen.
You should.
Anyway, we like to end our podcasts by asking our guests, what is your mountain? Mm-hmm. You've talked a lot about your journey to becoming a hunter and to getting into the conservation space in a professional capacity. Now you've had a lot of experiences in a lot of different places on public lands and presumably on private lands too. And what's that space out there? What's your mountain? What's that place that is your motivation, or that's so special to you that kind of fills your soul? Mm-hmm.
The Bitterroots. The Bitterroot Range. Those are my mountains. There's the Bitterroot Sapphires, there's the Selway Bitterroot, the whole thing. I just love it. It was a huge draw for why I moved to Montana in the first place. And then just my experience as a hunter, getting to know those mountains, so intimately, and so deeply. You guys know. There are certain places where you can't adequately describe your connection to the place. They've supported me through a lot of difficult times in my life, and they've offered a lot of joy, and it feels like home.
Well, and there are places where even if you could put the words to describe it, you wouldn't want to, because you don't want to encourage more people to go there, right?
Exactly. Yeah. They're gnarly. They really are gnarly woods. Yeah.
They're your mountain, not our mountain.
Exactly.
Actually, they're our mountain too.
Technically, they're our mountain. Yep. They belong to everybody. But I won't tell you my secret spots.
I can 100% respect that.
I'll take you there, though. I have a friend who's like, I won't tell you about it, but I'll take you there.
Blindfold them first. Black bag.
Just turn him in circles till he's really dizzy.
Yeah. Put on some, headphones with heavy metal blaring and, blindfold me and drive me around for 20 hours to take me the 4 miles that we have to go to get to your spot. Whatever it takes. I'll be there.
Takes.
I'll be there. Good. Yeah. Is there anything else that you weren't able to touch on that you really want to mention before we sign off?
I don't think so. This was a great conversation, and I feel like I went in a lot of different directions, and I enjoyed it. I think, I would just encourage. I don't know. As I said, for me, becoming a hunter changed my perspective and my relationship to the natural world. And so I think when we're encouraging people to take the step to go into the field, not to short sell that aspect of it. I think a lot of the conversation around getting new hunters is led by conservation and the importance of it as a source of funding. And I don't want to undersell that, because that is vital. But even more important is the relationship that it helps you form with the natural world and how it changes what it means to you. And I think we need to talk more about that.
And I think you're doing a good job of that, by the way.
Thank you.
So thank you. Mike, Nephi, do you have any parting words or questions for Marcia?
Marcia, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and providing a little bit extra perspective on how to really think about from the eyes of where you came in, just, how to maybe integrate other people in our lives, in our hunting community. So appreciate that.
Nephi?
I think it's been a great conversation, and I'm struggling with how to kind of wrap my, final thoughts up other than to say thank you. I think that it's so important, not only what you're doing is awesome for Artemis, and that program needs to continue to grow. But from a larger perspective, it's so important to have voices out there to talk with people about it and to create awareness of all the things that we can do to try and make our community more inclusive and to try and make sure that there are opportunities. So you discovered this, hunting later in life. Like, we got to make sure that opportunity is there for all the other people that haven't discovered it yet and that want to discover it in the future. And thank you for your advocacy in that realm.
My pleasure. Like I said, I wanted a job where I could do just this, and I lucked out.
Yeah, you struck gold for sure. But I would also say that Artemis struck gold with your leadership, and it's what you're doing there is so important. I can tell you, I know you mentioned how I wear the hat. My oldest daughter wears the hat and the shirt and has a sticker on her kayak. She's a believer already. So you're inspiring people you haven't yet met. And, just know that the work that you do is really mattering. It's really influential. And I would ask everybody that's listening, to take the time to check out, what the Artemis Sportswomen's program is. Take some time to dig into the materials on the website. Take some time to listen to the podcast. Flood Marcia's inbox with questions. She gave you her email address. Nobody does that.
I won't tell you people I've given my phone number to. I'm not going to do that on this podcast. But.
Okay. But take advantage of the fact that you now have her email address in the public domain and pepper her with questions, because if I know Marcia, she'll answer every question that you send in. And I know you're passionate about this. So once again, thank you for taking this time with us and for doing the work that you're doing, for everybody, for women out there, for the broader hunting community. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for everybody listening, as always, be safe, stay healthy. Hopefully you can get outside, because like we always say, remember that life is about experiences. So go have one.